Hello, everyone, and welcome to Catholic Table Talk, where everything Catholic is on the table podcast. I'm your host, William Sauber. Episode 5, now in recording or on air, wherever you think. Good to have everyone join me again. Thank you for your continuous support, telling your friends and family about the podcast, as well as your feedback for the podcast. Have had lots of great feedback, even from non-Catholics. So thank you for that. We have a few guests lined up in the coming weeks, so like I said, please be patient. But we have about 3 or 4 guests lined up as of right now. So we got a whole month's worth of guests coming on the show very soon. Today's topic is from the National Catholic Register newspaper again. Sorry, I like these guys. NCAA basketball champions coach advice. He says, stay close to Christ. And it's men's basketball college Virginia Cavaliers Brad Soderberg. He says he is thankful for silent adoration during March Madness. So in the coming episode, we'll talk a little bit more about sports players who are playing and who did play, who are Catholic. And today we're talking about a Catholic coach. And it said Soderberg's main message is not only during the trials of Holy Week, but throughout the year, is to stay close with Christ. It is only by patiently being with the Lord and the suffering that the faithful are able to partake in his victory over death, he says. And also, there's dozens of baseball stories at the Catholic Register if you want to check them out as well about Catholic and baseball and stuff. And he was interviewed by the National Catholic Register, and one of the questions was, how does basketball compare to baseball as a parallel to the faith life? He says that's an interesting dynamic. It could be an example of how relative silence and defibrillation is to help make people more receptive to God. As a type of personality, I've gradually learned that the value of shutting off the noise and slowing down to think and pray in adoration has helped. I would also say that aside from sports, I do or don't play. The main reason I'm a practicing Catholic is the upbringing of my parents and my grandparents, he says. Maybe it took a great upbringing to temper my personality. I really like to get things done and enjoy action, which is fine, he says, but it's also beneficial to slow down and shut up on a regular basis and to be in silence. So that action will be directed by wisdom rather than raw energy. Again, this is Brad Soderberg, the head coach of Virginia Cavaliers men's basketball 2019 NCAA champions. And this past year, they lost in the fourth round to Ohio. And about that loss to Ohio, he says, that was a sad loss, but that's the nature of basketball. Anything can happen. That's also the nature of life. Now it's up to us to rebound and do better next year. We already have one example of losing in the first round of the tournament and then winning it in the following season. So it's up to us again to work toward that. And then one of the other questions was asked to him, There are so many life lessons that can be learned by playing sports. He says that's right. Athletes learn how to be disciplined, how to deal with unwanted criticism, overcome adversity, communicate with teammates and coaches, and make good decisions. And I agree with that because I played baseball in high school, and that's what you had to do. You had to do stuff outside baseball and in baseball, communicate with teammates and especially coaches. So that's right on cue. And actually, after winning the national co- championship in 2019, he declined a pay raise one of his friends did later that year. Instead of he pledged a $500,000 fund for a career program for Virginia basketball players who will work outside of the sport. That's one of his friends who did that. And also another question is, it might be parallel to have a spiritual director, right? And he says, it's kind of like that, yes. My spiritual director is more knowledgeable than I am, so I routinely asked him for advice. One of the best pieces of advice he gave me was to read the Catechism of the Catholic Church from cover to cover, he says. That advice shook me at first because I was thinking in terms of reading the entire thing all at once, which I haven't read the Catechism of the Catholic Church yet from cover to cover, but I know you can't really read it all at once. Then I realized that if you break up into smaller pieces, it's easy to do. What I went on, I went on to learn a ton about our great church from paced reading of all the four major parts of it. Number one, the creed. Number two, the commandments. Number three, the sacraments. And number four, prayer of the catechism. So it's good to have a spiritual director in your life. It might be a friend, it might be a pastor at your church, it might be a deacon at your church. For me, I have a couple spiritual kind of directors I kind of think about. One is my confirmation sponsor. The other one is a friend who used to go to my church, and now they live down in the cities. Of course, my mom and dad. And basically, the past couple pastors of St. Michael's and Sacred Heart of my parish. Those are my spiritual directors I kind of look to for advice. And then he goes on to say, the question is asked, so even though you're at a secular school, not a Catholic school, you don't need to find a Catholic one in order to embrace and act for good, right? He says, that's right. I've coached at both Catholic schools and secular schools, but the main thing is my own soul's disposition. It's even possible that I could wind up doing more at a secular school. I just hope my differences get out of the way enough for players and students to see Christ. He says, when I get a chance to speak to groups, the main thing is I try to say and get the point across to them is this: stay close to Christ. This might seem obvious to a lot of people, but if you think about it, when were the times you got into trouble? When were the times you were not living with Christ? When was not he on your mind, in your heart, or in your actions? The key then to live virtuously, which means happily, is to maintain a virtual connection with Christ. This this is done through receiving the sacraments, like communion, reconciliation, baptism, all that. But especially communion, because you only get baptized once, and confirmation, conformed once. So reconciliation and Eucharist. outdone with prayer or consistent background or soundtrack, so to speak. And then another question is, you've spoken of the importance of Eucharistic adoration and silence and prayer. What would you say to people who are not familiar with that practice, like Catholics who don't know a lot about it, or especially non-Catholics? He says we can imagine what it would be like to live with Christ when he walked the earth, preaching, healing, and leading people back to the right path. Maybe the most important things to remember about Christ, especially since Holy Week just went past, are his sufferings, willing to endure out his love for us on the cross. After hearing and reading stories about Christ, we have to act upon them. That's too. Catholics, you go to church, listen to the gospel, listen to the Father give his homily or sermon. I like to say homily. And then you have to act on it. You can't just think back, oh, that would be nice, but you have to act on it so you can be a better person for yourself and for others. And he says, when we read the 6th chapter of John's Gospel, what else could we do but be drawn more toward receiving the Eucharist truly? Not just physically, it's the body and blood of Christ. That's the summit of Christian life, he says. And Eucharistic adoration outside of Mass is one of the most special moments. It's a matter of being drawn to the Lord's presence before the Blessed Sacrament and remain there with Him. Who wouldn't want to go to visit the Son of the Living God in the tabernacles of every single Catholic church in the world? He says this invitation goes as much for Catholics as it does for non-Catholics. Simply being baptized doesn't automatically mean that we're with Christ forever, since we can turn away and unfortunately break our baptismal promises. That's why he gave us free will, free choice to follow him or not to follow him. He says, I used to take the Eucharist for granted, but because of an association with Opus Dei, which started about 15 or 20 years ago when I was coaching in St. Louis, I am much more aware of the awesome reality that takes place in every Catholic sanctuary. The first time was Holy Thursday 2,000 years ago, was the first Eucharist at the Last Supper. And the Church has been blessed beyond measure by this super abundantly miraculous occurrence countless times since. And that's the end of the article. But like he says to have a good spiritual director, go to Eucharistic adoration, spend time in prayer and silence. If you are a Catholic, or maybe you're not Catholic, still to try it. Receive the sacraments most often as possible, and never take the Eucharist for granted. Which I think a lot of people did. They took the Eucharist. This is just my opinion now, but I think a lot of people took the Eucharist for granted, the same as Mass before COVID-19. Maybe you did. But it was just kind of also just part of life. You go to church, receive Holy Communion, you walk out of church, and you go on with your life more. Try and be a better person. But when everything shut down, you couldn't receive the Eucharist no more, and you couldn't go to church anymore for at least, at least for me, it was only about 2 months, but it seemed like a long time. So that's why I try not to take the Eucharist for granted. I try not to take going for Mass for granted. And maybe you did the same thing. So But I like how he also points out that the main reason he's a practicing Catholic is by his parents and his grandparents that gave him. So it's really important how you teach your kids and your grandkids about the Catholic faith. I like also grandparents too, because when he mentions them, because they actually help out the parents, you could say, more. So I like that part. So yeah, that's out of the article. Like I said, I'll post the article on YouTube and Facebook so you guys can read the entire thing. I just kind of skipped out a couple lines just talking about basketball more. I just went more to the faith part. So if you want to read the whole article just published, you click on the link below. And thank you again for listening. Hopefully you have guests on the way from now on. Like I said, we're just trying to line up people, so we can get them in one at a time, not like four at a time. So we'll line them up, and we'll see you soon. Thanks again for listening. We'll see you next time on Catholic Table Talk, where everything Catholic is on the table.